Hi all, welcome to module P4. In this module, we'll be adding a few more pages to our web app, and by doing that exercise, we will learn a little bit about server-side programming and getting an introduction to HTML and CSS. Our objective in this course is to understand how server-side programming works and how we make different URLs and handle those different URLs. We'll also try to learn the fundamentals of HTML and CSS, and we'll be introduced to the concept of server-side templating, which in the future will lead us on to databases. This entire module is structured around a very simple task. The task is that we want to make a few simple web pages, and we want to publish those pages on our web app by making it accessible on certain URLs. So if we look at my web app, which is coco98.hasura-app.io, the final target is to have 3 more URLs available, /article1, /article2, and /article3. This is how we will proceed. We will add URLs for each web page, and we'll first test if our URLs are working and we're able to serve some responses on them. To do this, we have to understand how URL-based routing works. If you remember from module P1, when we were using HTTP server and I mentioned that we could have used Apache or Nginx as well, we noticed that they were pre-configured, that they would take any input URL and convert that into a file path. They would search for that file within the same directory that they were running in or they were configured to use, and then they would try to serve the file from that path if it was available. We are going to do something similar, but we are going to write the logic of what happens when you go to a particular URL. So let's see how that happens. I first go to my console. I go to my code console. Now this is where we left off last time, where I made some changes on the server side to my HTML file, and then I made some changes from my local computer, and then I deployed the site. This is where we left off last time. The first thing that we want to do is add 3 URLs and serve test responses from those URLs. Head to your server.js file. Your server.js file is the file that is actually executed, and it is the source code of your web server. Let's quickly try to read the source code of this web server to understand what is happening. In the first 3 lines, we are importing certain software packages. These are very commonly used libraries. Express is the library that is used for us to create the web server so that we don't have to do the work of learning how to listen on a port or handling HTTP connections. We use the library Morgan to help us output logs of our server so that we know what requests are coming to our server and how we're responding. The next few lines, line number 8, 12, and 16, are the lines of code that are handling specific URLs. So for example, here we have app.get/, and when a get request is made to /, this function should execute. On line number 12, we have app.get/UI/style.css, which says that if this URL is requested, a get request is made to this URL, this function is executed. And similarly on line 16, if this particular URL path is requested, this function will execute. So what do these functions do? The first one, if the browser or a client makes a request to the URL path /, we use the send file function to pick up the file UI/index.html, which is available to us, and we send the content of that file. Similarly, when UI/style.css is requested, we send off that file, and when the image is requested, we send off the image. Let's see how this works in action. So I restart my server. We'll wait for the server to start. So if I click on inspect element like we had last time, and I head to the network tab and I refresh the page again, you'll see that 3 requests are made. And if you look at these 3 requests, the first request is to our domain /. The second request is to /UI/style.css, and the third request is to /UI/madi.png. In fact, it's also making a request to a JavaScript file /UI/main.js, but we don't have any server-side code that handles this URL, which is why the server is responding with the 404, which means that this URL path was not found or not handled by our web server. We will correct this part of our web server when we come to client-side JavaScript in the next few modules. So now that we've understood how our page is making requests and how our current web server file is working, let's quickly add 3 more URL handling functions. Article 1, and if article 1 URL is requested, and I'll add a semicolon here, and if the article 1 URL is requested, I will currently just reply with article 1 requested and will be served here, and I put a semicolon. I'm going to copy these lines and I'm going to write article 2, article 3, right? So we've added 3 more URL handlers and we're sending test responses. These are just plain text responses. These are not HTML responses. Let's commit and restart our server. Just a simple thing to notice while you're programming, if you're making errors when you write code, for example, if I do this, you will see a small icon that pops up here that tries to help you, saying that your syntax seems to be incorrect, or it's warning you that your syntax is incorrect. For example, if you do this and you don't have a closing bracket, you'll see another kind of error, right? So use these as guides when you're programming. Our application has been restarted, so let's go and refresh this page. And let's head to /article1. And you can see that article 1, we're getting a response here. Let's switch that out to article 2. And using article 2, let's switch this out to article 3, and using article 3. So all 3 URLs seem to be working. Great. So now that we have our URLs and we are able to serve responses on those URLs, we need to make simple web pages, and then ultimately we'll serve these web pages from our URLs. So how do we make a web page? The language that the browser understands to be able to show you a web page is HTML and CSS. The browser can understand these 2 languages, HTML and CSS, and render them to create web pages the way we use them on the internet. Let's understand this in a little more detail. HTML is a language, it's not really a programming language, and the purpose of HTML is to convey the structure that our content has. It is a means for, like any language, like any human to computer language, it is a language that is meant to be written by humans and to be understood by software. Whenever a language is understood by software, the language will have what is called a syntax. It will have a very particular and a very definite structure. And this structure is something that can be automatically understood by the machine or by the browser and converted into a visual display. So let's look at an example of how HTML works. On the leftmost side on this box, you see that there is some content written. This is content that would typically go onto a profile page. And you can notice that this content is just text, right? This is not the way we would like to display our content on the profile page. We would like to display it like how we have on the right here. So how do we help the browser understand that this text has to be displayed in this way, right? To do this, we use the language HTML. And so let's look at what the HTML looks like. The first thing that we do is we say h1 personal /h1. So this part is used to represent that h1 is starting. And so we say start a heading, the content of the heading, which is text, which is personal. And then we say /h1, which is meant to say end the heading. Similarly, we start a paragraph, we put the content here and we end the paragraph. Then we start a new heading, professional, and we end the heading. We start a paragraph, we end the paragraph. Then we start an ordered list. OL is intended to represent ordered list. So we start an ordered list and we end the ordered list here. The first element in that list is your first professional experience. The second element of that list is the second experience, right? So this is how we move from text to HTML, and the browser understood the HTML and can display it like this. But if you think about it, we actually didn't tell the browser how to make the content look. We helped the browser understand what the sections of our text are. So we said that this text has many sections. The first section is a heading, the next section is a paragraph, then there's another heading, then there's a paragraph, and then there's an ordered list. But how does the browser know what an ordered list is? How does the browser know that, this heading should be displayed in a larger font size, it should be bold, it should have more spacing, or how does the browser know that if there is a list, there should be a little bit of a space on the left, and then there should be there should be one, and then there should be another piece of space here? How does the browser know this? And we call this styling, right? This is not structure. This is style, and the browser understands style using a language called CSS. But even if you don't specify a custom style for what a heading is, all browsers have a lot of defaults, and the browser renders particular structural elements with some default styling. So for example, by default, the browser will represent a heading in this particular way. The browser will represent a heading, a paragraph in this particular way, a list in this particular way. So suppose you want to customize these defaults, right? You would write in a language called CSS, and in the CSS language, you will specify what the styling for that structural element is. And so here we have a snippet of CSS, and the CSS language, which is very different from the HTML language, says that for the H1 element, apply this styling. For the P element, apply this styling. For the body element, apply this styling. Let's see what that looks like, right? By default, the browser was converting this HTML into this visual rendering, right? But if we apply this CSS, where we are saying H1 should have a text decoration underline, the P paragraph should have a font color gray, and the entire body, which is everything that surrounds the HTML, should be a background white. And so if we apply this CSS, the browser will not render your HTML like this, but it will render the HTML like this. And here you can see that more styling has been applied. The heading is underlined. It still has the default styling, which is bold and larger font size, but it also has an underline. So our CSS added to the default CSS that the browser had. Similarly, the paragraph was colored gray, but the original defaults of the browser in the way it renders the paragraph was preserved, right? And we did not modify the way the list is rendered. So now let's actually add some HTML files, and let's add our 3 article pages. So once again, I head to the console. I have to add a new page. So I can add a new page by directly going on to GitHub. So I go to GitHub, I go to the UI folder, I say create new file, and I'll name my file article1.html, and I'm just going to put in some data because we'll actually edit these files on our console. So I say HTML and I say commit new file. So it saves the file here. Let's go back to our console. Let's refresh the console. So you can see that article1.html has appeared here as well. Let's click on this and let's start editing our content. So whenever you're writing an HTML file, you always write the tag HTML and you close the HTML file here. The first thing that we'll do is add a head tag, and here we'll write the title. The title of the page is the bit that appears here. This is the title, the part that appears on the tab, right? So we'll say title article 1, right? And now we'll start writing the body. The body is the bit of HTML that is actually displayed here. This is the body, right? So in the body, we'll first have a header. So we'll write home, right? And then let's put a horizontal line, right? So that's a horizontal line that we're putting. So our first section is a division which contains a link, so a link back to the home page, right, which is represented by the URL /, and after that we have a horizontal line, after which I'll have a heading. So I will give it a h3 and I'll say article 1. I then want to have a section that displays the date, so I'll say the date is September 5, 2016, right? I'll add another section to my HTML page, and this is where I'll start actually writing the content. This is the content for my first article, right? And I'm going to just copy paste this a few times, right? And let me have a few more paragraphs, in fact. So let's just align this a little bit. It's very good practice to have formatted code, right? So that this helps other people read your code, right? Okay, cool. So we have article1.html, which is some text here, right? Let's link this to our server file. So I go to our server file, and instead of returning text, I will now return article1. So I'm going to copy paste this line, and I'm going to replace it here, and I'll rename index.html to article1.html, right? And let's see if everything works. So I commit these files, I go to my app, and I'll go to the page article1. Let's refresh this and see, wait for our server to start. And there we go. So we have our first HTML page that's ready. You can see that if I click on the home link, I'll go back to the home page, and otherwise I have my article content. You can see that this is a heading, there's a little bit of a space here, and then there are paragraphs, right? And whenever I create a paragraph element, the default styling of the browser is automatically separating that by a space, right? What we'll also do to our HTML file is that we'll add a special tag. So we'll add this special tag, and this tag is for mobile browsers, so that mobile browsers don't display our website in a way that is zoomed out, and you don't have to zoom in to view this website on mobile. This will automatically work on mobile browsers, and we'll understand how this works later on. So this is my HTML file. I'm going to commit this again so that it's saved to the GitHub project. Cool. Now let's go ahead and add some more files. So I go back to GitHub. So let's quickly add some more files. I go back to the UI folder. I'm going to say create new file, article2.html. So here we have article2.html, and I'm just going to copy the content from my original article, paste it here. I'll change the content to article2, make this article2. This is the content for my second article, right? Okay, let's save this file, right? And let's quickly create a new file. So let's say article3.html, copy paste this data, and change, this is my third article. Let's change the date here, and there we go. Alright, so I've got my third HTML page. I save this. Let's refresh our console. So you can see that we've got 3 files here. Let's make sure that the URLs can serve these. So I'm again going to copy paste this line, right, and change this to article2.html, and change this line and make it article3.html, right? Let's save this, and let's restart our browser. So let's head to article2 and check if things are working. Wait a little bit for our server to restart, and there we go. There we have article2. Let's go to article3, and we have article3, content for my third article. You can see the title here. Great. So we've added 3 HTML files and 3 different URLs. So now let's write some CSS and try to make our site look a little better. Once again, I head back to the console, and I'm going to go to article1.html. So what I would like to do on my page, and let's look at the page article1. Alright, so here we have article1. Now what I would like to do to make this page look better, and I'm going to center the content a little bit. This is too wide. I'm also going to change the colors a little bit and change the font also. So let's quickly look at how we do that. So I can add CSS to my HTML document by creating a style tag and then writing content inside the style tag. So the first thing that I want to do is put the whole thing in a section. So let's do this. Right, let's put that in here, and let's give this particular section a class name. Right, so a class is just a kind of tag that you can attach, and I'll call this container. Right, so now what I'll do is I'll say take the container element, which is referred to as dot container, and give it a maximum width of 800 pixels. Right, and I want to center it, so I'll say center it automatically from the slides, give it an automatic margin on the left and right hand side so that the content seems centered. I also want the color to be kind of a gray, and I don't want the color to be black. And most importantly, I would like the font to be a sans serif font, right? So let's execute these changes and see what that looks like. So I restart my server. And there you go. So I have this. It's already looking a little neater because I can read my content more easily. So I want to figure out how to make this neater. So I will first make these changes inside my inspect element itself. So let's look at container, and I think I should add a little bit of a gap on the top. So maybe 60 pixels of a gap. The color is a little too dark, so too light, so let's find a slightly better color. There we go. Right, and alright, so that makes my page look a little neater, right? And let's just try to resize our browser to see what it would look like on mobile. So on mobile, there's a little bit of a gap that's appearing that's not there on the sides. So let's go to our container and make sure that it has a little bit of a padding on the left and the right hand side. So I'm going to say padding left of about 20 pixels and padding right of about 20 pixels, right? So this makes it a little easier to sort of look at this content on mobile, right, on a mobile browser. And then let's resize this back to see if everything's okay. Good, things are looking fine. So I'm going to take the CSS that I had in inspect element, and I'm going to take this and shamelessly copy paste it back into my code. So there we go. Let's align this to make it look a little better. There is nothing uglier to a programmer than unaligned code. Cool. So I've done this. Let's commit and restart. Wait for it to restart. And let's start a server again. And we have article 1 that is working. So now I'll have to go and apply these changes on the other articles as well. So I'll have to go to article 2 and copy paste these changes, and I'll have to go to article 3 and also copy paste them. And once I do that, I'll have the same styling that is applied to article 1, 2 and 3, right? So when we are copying the styling, we'll have to also modify the HTML to add this sort of container element so that we can style the container element, right? So finally, at the end of this, right, we've achieved our goal of having created 3 URLs and having 3 pages and having a little bit of styling on them as well, right? So for example, we're going to have article 1, our article 2 and our article 3, and we have 3 pages and we've styled them. Now if you observed, I was copy pasting throughout the session. I was copy pasting the HTML, I was copy pasting lines in server.js, and I was even copy pasting the CSS information, right? So how can we avoid writing so much code? The goal of a good programmer is always to write the least amount of code possible, right? We should never repeat functionality by repeating code. And apart from being aesthetically not very elegant, this is also potentially harmful. You guys should read up a little bit on the internet about what is called the DRY principle, the DRY principle, and why repeating code could be potentially harmful. So we have 3 specific areas where we want to reduce the code written: common CSS, common HTML, and common lines in server.js. Let's see how we do this. So I go back to my code console, and I've already copied. So I go back to my coding console, The first thing that I'm going to do is remove the CSS and move it into a separate file. So I'm going to take this CSS content and I'm going to put it in style.css. I'm going to align this a little bit. I press Shift Tab to align that. And what I'll do is now, obviously, because I'm using style.css, I have to refer to this style file inside my HTML code. So I'm going to take this line, which is linking the file, and I'm going to add it to so there we removed that CSS. Let's also do this to article 3, and we can copy that line of code. So all of them are now referring to the same CSS file. So this is called a link element, and the link element allows us to link the CSS file in the HTML code, right? Let's save this. So that's one change that we made. Let's now make another change to reduce the HTML that we're writing, and this is going to be a little complicated, so watch carefully. The first thing that I want to do is understand that the HTML content, right, is mostly common. What is differing is the title, the heading, the date, and the content, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a series of objects in my server.js file. So I'm going to create var content, and I'm going to make a JavaScript object. Inside this object, I'll have something called title of the page, and the title of the page is, I then have a heading, and which is article 1. I have a date, which is September 5, 2016. I have the content, which is fairly large. So I'll go back to article 1, take all of this content, copy this, and let's put this into our server.js file. Now you can see that I'm getting a lot of JavaScript errors because my line is spread across multiple lines. And so in JavaScript, if you want to have a string that spans multiple lines, use back quote instead of a single quote. So I use a back quote, and this allows me to write a multi-line string, right? And so now we have an object that has a content, right? And this is the content for, I'm going to call it article 1, right? So we have our content. What we want to do is inject this data into a common HTML template. Let's make another object called HTML template, and this is again a multi-line string, and let's copy this HTML, right? We've copied that. Let's remove the portions that are common. So I'm going to delete this, and I'm going to replace this with content, right? I'm going to replace this part with date. I'm going to replace this part with heading. I'm going to replace this part with title, right? So these are the portions that will come through my JavaScript object and be injected into the HTML. So now this is a special feature of JavaScript that allows us to create a string that has variables in the middle. However, these variables don't actually exist because there's no variable called title, heading, date, and content yet. So what we'll actually have to do is create a function called create template, and this function will take a data object, right? And let's move that here. So this is a function that has a data object, and let's create the variables to make sure that these variables exist. So we have title, which is equal to data.title. We have date, which is again coming from data. We have heading, which comes from data.heading, and we also have content, which comes from data.content. So assuming that the create template function gets an object that contains title, date, heading and content, we'll be able to create the string that contains the entire HTML, and then let's do return HTML template. So this will now be returned by the function. So I shall go to article 1, and instead of doing a send file, I'm going to change this back to just a send create template, and I'm going to give it the content object that I had, which was article 1. Right, so as you can see, the article 1 object was here. So I have the article 1 object here. I use the article 1 object and give it to the create template function. The create template function takes that object, extracts the right variables from it, creates a string, returns the string, and then that string is sent back in a send request. So let's save all of this work. And so we have article 1 working. If you notice, the background has been applied, which was a gray background, which was a part of the CSS file that we referred to. So if you see that the background color was light gray, let's remove the background color element here. And now since we already added a padding top, we have two options. We can either let the body margin top remain or change the margin top on our container element. Let's change this to 60 pixels so that it applies on all pages, and let's remove it from here. Right, save this. Now we've done this for article 1, right? So now we don't need the article1.html file anymore, right? Let's do this same exercise for the rest of our functions. So what we'll have to do is create more data objects, right? So let's change this a little bit, and let's create an object called articles, right? And the articles object is an object which contains, and then we have, so the idea is now to have an article 2 which will itself be an object, and then an article 3 which will also be an object, and let's close this here, right? So now what we would like to do is write this data, copy this data inside article 2, right? We can change our content here and here, and change the date to maybe 10th, reduce a lot of the content on this. Let's say this is the content for my second article, right? So pay attention to the error block here, where it's saying that my syntax is wrong, and it should not be an equal to, it should actually be a colon because we're inside an object, right? So I'm going to take this for article 2 and make this article 3, 15, this is the content of my third article. So now I have 3 article objects. So let's compress this, and you can see that I have an articles object which contains article 1, article 2, article 3. The question now is, how are we going to avoid writing these lines of code? And so we're going to do a smart thing, which is replace this with a parameter called article name. If I use a colon here in the root matching, and this is a feature of the Express framework, that if I use a colon and enter a name, this will try to match this particular, it will match this particular part of the path and convert that into a variable. So that means now that article name will be article -1, right? So this is what is going to happen. I'm going to use this property to output the right article object. So I'm going to say articles of article name, right? So now what will happen is, if I do articles of article name, this content will be the content object for article 1, right? This should work. However, our URLs are article-1 and article-2, but our object names are different. So let's change these object names quickly. And so we put article-1, article-2, and article-3, right? So now the names are corresponding with the article names. I can use this to get rid of this code as well. So now I need the article name value. To extract this article name, I'll have to write article name is equal to rec.params.article name. So this is how I'm able to extract this parameter. This is again a functionality that is provided to me by the Express framework, and this allows me to extract the article name and use that article name to index into the articles object and then create the template from that. Let's save this. And so I have article-1 that loads. Let's change this to article-2. Article-2 is also working, and you can see the new date. And let's go to article-3, and you can see that article-3 is working as well. And we've reduced a lot of code from our server.js file, and we actually don't need these files anymore. So let's go back to our GitHub account. Let's go to article-1, and let's actually delete this file. So let's say commit. Let's go to article-2, delete. Let's also delete article-3. So we don't need these files anymore. Let's refresh our console. So we reduced our code and automated the URL mapping, converted that into the reference inside an object, used the data inside that object to create the right HTML string, and then served that HTML string as a response. So this was an extremely heavy module because not only did we take a lot of our concepts and apply them, but we also wrote a lot of specific code. And there are many times in this video when you would have not seen these different programming elements. And so I've listed out a bunch of references that you guys should refer to and use to understand the kind of stuff that we did. Just to quickly read them out, we used a style tag some CSS, and you can read up a little more about how CSS selectors work. The CSS selector is what allows us to select the right HTML element to modify. We also used a link tag to link our CSS. We can actually use a link tag to link many other things apart from a CSS. We should also read up a little bit about CSS, and this guide from Mozilla is a nice place to read up on CSS. We also used multi-line strings and template strings, which is a new JavaScript language feature and uses backquotes. The backquote character is typically to the left of a 1 on your keyboard, and you might not have used it very often. We also used URL parameterization, which is a way to extract a part of a root or a URL in Express and convert that into a variable that can be used in code. So read up on these things to help you understand how we wrote the code that we wrote today. Also, while you're writing code, you might have to iterate quite frequently because very often you will be making small mistakes that you will only catch after you deploy your code. And so I would recommend that you actually try to set up the local development environment because that will help you iterate much faster. Please refer to the previous module to understand how to set up a local development environment. There are a lot of guides on the internet to help you set up the environment on Linux or Windows or Mac, and use those guides. In fact, just as a quick note, a lot of times when you do application development, most of the latest information is something that you'll have to find yourself online. And for example, the references that I gave for installing something on Mac is something that might change 6 months later or 1 year later. And because these things are moving so quickly, we as developers have to get used to searching for content on the internet, used to collaborating with the community and reading and learning by ourselves on the internet. And so please don't give up or lose hope when things are not working for you. If you're not able to set Git up, or if you're getting permissions errors, do a lot of research, be persistent, search for things on Google, ask questions on the forum, and you will eventually get your environment working for you. In the next module, we're going to be learning what client-side JavaScript is, which is JavaScript that executes on the browser, not JavaScript that is executing on the server. And we'll also learn how to write our own API, and we'll actually implement our own API endpoint.